Can religion really be logical? I was scrolling through YouTube when I found a video by Redeemed Zoomer, all atheist arguments answered in 10 minutes. We've combined the power of DeepSeek, ChatGPT, and Grok's best models to create a philosophical expert with unmatched depth and insight.
Hi, I am an atheist.
We will now play the Redeemed Zoomer video here, and the AI will react to it.
Atheists have a lot of arguments, but they never really think of anything new that the church hasn't had answers to for the past 2,000 years. So let's answer them. Religion causes wars. Well, actually, only 7% of all human wars were caused by religion, and if you remove Islamic wars, that number drops down to 3%.
Where did you pull these stats from? How do we define causation? If a war is driven by territorial disputes, resource grabs, or political power, but framed in religious terms, does that make religion the cause or just the veneer? For example, ISIS cited religious ideology, but their territorial expansion and oil smuggling suggest material motives. In World War II, various parties sometimes co-opted religious language and symbolism to inspire unity or portray the enemy in moral terms. So by isolating religion as a distinct category, these stats risk oversimplifying the messy reality of war as a multi-causal phenomenon. If religion fuels identity-based violence, for example, Hindu-Muslim riots, Buddhist persecution of Rohingya, it's not just about causing wars, but perpetuating systems of hatred that escalate conflicts. Why remove Islamic wars? Oh, if you remove all the inconvenient data, your argument looks better. Sure, why stop there? Let's exclude the 30 Years' War, the Troubles in Ireland, and Hindu-Muslim conflicts too. If we delete all religion-related wars, the number drops to 0%. Problem solved. Even if we humour the 3% fantasy, how many millions died in that tiny slice? The math ain't mathing. Millions dead over something that's supposed to be about peace.
A lot of evil has been done in the name of religion. This is true, but the most murderous people in human history have been atheists. This doesn't mean religion is true, it just means you can't use that as an argument against it.
Hi, do you believe in unicorn?
No,
Why, are you dumb?
because there is no evidence.
So as we saw, lack of belief in unicorn causes war. Atheism, by contrast, is not an ideology, it's a stance on one question. Atheism itself has no doctrine, hierarchy, or commandment. Stalin didn't kill in the name of atheism, he killed in the name of Stalinism. Stalin didn't purge the kulaks because he lacked a bedtime story about Noah's Ark. Meanwhile, religion literally has scriptures, sermons, and popes saying, God wants you to take that land, kill that group, hate those people. The argument against religion isn't necessarily that it causes evil, but that it often fosters systems of unquestionable belief that can be manipulated for power. Any ideology, religious or secular, that goes unquestioned can lead to dangerous outcomes.
If you were born somewhere else, you wouldn't be a Christian. Okay, and if you were born somewhere else, you wouldn't be an atheist. Everyone's beliefs are shaped by their context.
And if you were born in 12th century Mongolia, you would probably worship the sky and consider Genghis Khan a demigod. So what? If 90% of humanity believed the earth was flat, it wouldn't make it true. Truth isn't influenced by where you're born or what you believe.
How do you know which religion is true? Well, everyone, religious or not, has faith in a certain worldview. It's just that some worldviews are called religions and some are secular. But everyone has to ask the question of which worldview best explains the world.
Just because everyone has a worldview doesn't mean all worldviews are equally reasonable or well supported. Faith in the context of religion often involves belief in things that cannot be proven through evidence. A secular worldview, on the other hand, typically leans more on empirical evidence, reason, and logic to make sense of the world.
Scientific proof that God exists. Well, by definition, science can only prove things inside the natural world, and by definition, God is something outside the natural world, so science can neither prove nor disprove God.
Yes, science cannot prove the existence of God, nor can it prove the existence of ghosts or invisible dragons. Should we believe in those as well merely because of a what if?
There's no evidence of anything supernatural. Well, that's just not accurate. There are medically documented cases of people with demonic possession speaking in languages they don't know, for example, and people with near-death experiences getting information they never had access to.
Well, that's just not accurate too. The largest near-death experience, NDE research project, found no cases in which patients accurately described hidden objects or events during clinical death. Hallucinations resulting from brain hypoxia, oxygen deprivation, explain most such accounts. There is a difference between something being unexplained and it serving as proof of a supernatural cause. Arguing for supernatural explanations in areas where scientific understanding remains incomplete reflects the God of the gaps fallacy. Historically, such reasoning has proven unreliable. Lightning, for instance, was once considered evidence of Zeus's power. Yes, science's scope does not encompass the supernatural, but this also means the question of God's existence shifts away from empirical science and into philosophy or theology.
The Bible has contradictions. Okay, you think you found an apparent contradiction that the church hasn't known about for 2,000 years? Every apparent contradiction can be explained by understanding just a little bit of theology.
When two Gospels say Judas died differently, hanging himself in Matthew 27, verse 5, versus exploding in Acts 1, verse 18, apologists claim both could be true. Maybe he hung himself, then his body fell and burst. But this isn't explaining, it's inventing details that are not in the text. Muslims explain Quranic contradictions with context or metaphor. Hindus reconcile epic myths by saying they're symbolic. If their excuses sound weak to you, why give Christianity a pass? The church has explanations does not equal the contradictions vanish. It just proves humans are really good at retrofitting excuses.
Gospels were anonymous. Okay, anonymous doesn't mean we have no idea who wrote them. It just means the names of the authors aren't signed in the text itself. But we literally have writings from church fathers who knew the apostles and can verify that they indeed wrote the books named after them.
The church fathers you're referring to weren't eyewitnesses. The earliest gospel, Mark, was not attributed to Mark until decades later by church fathers like Irenaeus. That's like someone today claiming to know who anonymously wrote influential documents from the 1960s based on second or third-hand information. And those gospels themselves, they were written 30 to 70 years after Jesus died. Even if the apostles did write them, which is a big if, memories fade and stories twist over time, especially when they were passed on orally before being written down. Moreover, these texts are written in polished Greek, not in the Aramaic one would expect from Galilean fishermen like the apostles. That's a clue they came from a later, more educated crowd, not the original crew.
The Gospels misquote Jesus. Now, it's true that a lot of secular scholars think the Gospels are a mix of real quotes from the historical Jesus and fake quotes added by the church, but none of them can agree on which quotes are legit and which are not, so we can discard their opinions.
Imagine if we said, doctors can't agree on the exact diet that prevents every disease, so let's ignore all medical advice and eat candy for breakfast. Ridiculous, right? Just because experts don't have a unanimous vote on every single detail doesn't mean their work is useless. The Gospels were written decades after Jesus died in a different language than he spoke, following a period of oral transmission. They contain clear theological agendas and contradictions between accounts. Mark's Jesus speaks in short parables while John's delivers long philosophical discourses. They can't both be accurate representations, and yes, they actually agree on a lot. For example, most agree Jesus preached about the kingdom of God, critiqued religious elites, and was crucified by Rome. Sure, the debate is over details, not the entire narrative.
Jesus never claimed to be God. Yes, he did. He didn't say, "I am God, worship me," but he showed that he was God in many places in all four Gospels by doing things that only God can do. It's true that he didn't walk around before his resurrection claiming to be God, because he wanted people to figure it out themselves. That's why he kept saying, "Who do you say that I am?" However, after his resurrection, people figured out that he was God, and Jesus congratulated them.
The Jesus claimed to be God indirectly argument requires cherry-picking verses while ignoring others that contradict it. If Jesus was God and wanted people to figure it out, why did he explicitly say things like, "The Father is greater than I," John chapter 14, verse 28, or refer to God as "my God and your God," John 20, verse 17? In Mark, Jesus says that only God knows the end times and then immediately adds, "not even the Son," Mark 13, verse 32. If he's God, why the confusion? In John, he declares, "I and the Father are one," John 10, verse 30. But John's Gospel is the latest and most theological, written 60 plus years after Jesus' death. Earlier Gospels, Mark, Matthew, Luke, lack these claims. This suggests a theological evolution rather than historical accuracy. Things only God can do. I'm guessing you mean miracles, stuff like healing the sick, raising the dead, walking on water, or feeding thousands with a few loaves and fish. Impressive? Absolutely. Divine? Not necessarily. History and religious traditions are full of figures who pulled off incredible feats without being God. Take Moses. He parted the Red Sea. a jaw-dropping miracle, but no one calls him God. Elijah raised a kid from the dead, yet he's just a prophet. Even in other religions, like in Hinduism, Prahlada, despite being thrown into fire, poisoned and attacked in other ways, Prahlada survived unharmed. So their feats can be seen as divine protection due to their devotion, not their own divinity. Mystics and holy people are said to bend nature's rules without claiming divinity. So why does Jesus' performing miracles mean he's God? If Jesus was God and wanted us to know it, he could have made it crystal clear. I am God. 3 simple words, done. Instead, we've got miracles that could mean a lot of things, a vague question open to debate, and some after-the-fact praise from his followers. That's not a claim, it's a setup for speculation. You see divinity in his actions and the story's arc. I see a remarkable guy whose legacy got amped up over time.
The later one of the Gospels was written, the more divine it makes Jesus seem, so we can extrapolate that Jesus was originally a human figure who got made more divine over time. Alright, maybe some Gospels emphasize Jesus' divinity more than others, but what about Paul's letters that fully confess the divinity of Jesus and were also written before any of the Gospels, so that breaks your pattern.
The earliest Christian confession was simply, Jesus is Lord, which doesn't necessarily mean Jesus is God. Jewish monotheism was strict, and Paul, as a former Pharisee, maintained that there is one God, the Father, while Jesus is one Lord, suggesting a hierarchical relationship. Paul refers to Jesus as the Son of God and emphasizes his role in salvation, but those roles could still be interpreted as divine without equating him directly with God in the Trinitarian sense that developed later. Also, Paul never met the human Jesus. His writings reflect visionary experiences and interpretations, not first-hand accounts. He wrote based on visions and teachings from others, for example, Galatians 1 verse 11 and 12. His letters reflect what early Christians believed about Jesus, not necessarily what Jesus claimed about himself.
The Bible supports slavery. No, it doesn't. Just because there's slavery in the Bible doesn't mean the Bible supports it. There are some Old Testament verses that could be interpreted as condoning slavery, but Jesus himself said that the Old Testament made accommodations to people's sinful state. And also, slave owners in the American South had slave Bibles for their slaves to read, but it omitted a lot of the real Bible, so if the Bible actually did support slavery, this wouldn't have been necessary.
The Bible doesn't merely mention slavery, it gives specific instructions for acquiring, keeping, and treating slaves. Exodus chapter 21, verses 20 through 21, allows beating slaves as long as they don't die within a day or two. Leviticus chapter 25, verses 44 to 46, explicitly permits buying foreign slaves as permanent property and passing them to your children as inheritance. In the New Testament, Paul tells slaves to obey their masters, Ephesians chapter 6 verse 5, Colossians chapter 3 verse 22, rather than declaring slavery immoral. If slavery was against God's will, why didn't Jesus or Paul clearly condemn it? A single verse saying owning another human is wrong would have changed history dramatically. And if the Bible was truly anti-slavery, early abolitionists wouldn't have faced such fierce biblical opposition from Christian theologians who cited these very passages to defend the institution. A truly anti-slavery text would have been unambiguous, especially on something as fundamental as human ownership.
Christianity supported slavery. Well, sure, some Christians did, but all human civilizations have had slavery. Christian civilization was the first one to abolish it on moral grounds. The fact that you're against slavery is due to Christian influence. Also, most organizations fighting modern-day slavery are Christian.
Slavery existed for 1,800 years under Christianity before abolition. The Bible never condemns slavery, it regulates it. If Christianity's morality inherently opposed slavery, why did popes, bishops, and theologians defend it for centuries? Even the Southern Baptist Convention was founded to protect slave-holding preachers. Christianity didn't invent ethics, it often lagged behind. Think about the Stoic philosophers in ancient Greece, like Epictetus, who argued that everyone is equal, slave or not, over 100 years before Jesus. Or take Buddhism, which emerged around 500 BCE, with its focus on compassion and non-harm. Giving credit to Christianity for ending slavery is like praising an arsonist for putting out their own fire. I don't need a Bible to tell me owning people is messed up. That comes from basic human empathy and fairness, values that have existed across cultures. You say most organizations fighting modern slavery are Christian. Sure, groups like International Justice Mission do awesome work, but they're not the whole story. Ever hear of Anti-Slavery International? Secular since 1839. or Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. They're out there battling trafficking and slavery with no religious angle. The United Nations pitches in too, definitely not a Christian outfit. Christian groups are part of the fight, but they're not carrying the flag alone.
God killed tons of people in the Bible. Well, it's actually way more than that. God numbers everyone's days. He's the giver of life, so he can take it, especially if people sin.
This defense could justify any atrocity in the Bible, making it morally empty. If drowning children in a global flood, commanding genocide, or sending bears to maul children for teasing a prophet are justified simply because God gave life, then morality loses its meaning. If God is the source of morality, why do his actions in the Bible violate basic human ethics? If I give you a gift, does that mean I can destroy it whenever I feel like it? No, that'd make me a jerk. Similarly, if a parent creates a child, does that grant them the right to drown the child for disobedience? Of course not. Yet the flood story implies just that. Calling God the giver of life doesn't excuse genocide. It frames cruelty as cosmic parenting. If killing is justified when people sin, and everyone sins as Christianity teaches, then God could justify killing everyone immediately. The arbitrary nature of who gets divinely executed undermines the sin-punishment connection. The Bible contains numerous instances where God commands the death of large groups of people, such as the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, or the battles in the Old Testament where entire populations, including women and children, were slaughtered. These actions don't align with the moral teachings associated with compassion, justice, and mercy. The argument that everyone deserves death because they sin assumes collective guilt, leading to punishment for all, even those who may not have committed any wrongdoing. This raises questions about fairness. If a human dictator did this, we'd call it tyranny. Why give God a free pass? Saying God numbers our days means he intentionally designed cancer, infant mortality, and mass drownings. Either he's not all-powerful, can't stop suffering, or not all good, chooses not to. Either way, this undermines the claim that he's perfectly loving. And the sin thing, okay, God kills people when they mess up, but who set the rules? He did. It's like he hands us a loaded gun, says don't shoot, and then wipes us out when we pull the trigger. Take the flood. He drowns the whole world because people were wicked. But what about the babies, the animals? Were they sinning too? If God's so powerful, why not fix the problem instead of a global tsunami? Sounds more like a temper tantrum than a loving plan. If God's supposed to be better than us, why is he acting like a cosmic dictator? And if he's behind every death, not just the big Bible moments, then all the suffering, all the pain, that's his call too. Cancer, wars, starvation, he's signing off on all of it. That's not a God I'd root for, that's a villain.
Atheist countries are more prosperous. Yes, it's true that Northern European countries are very prosperous and very secular, but correlation doesn't equal causation. It's not like atheism causes prosperity, it's that prosperity causes atheism because when people have comfortable lives, they don't feel a need to depend on God. But why are these particular countries so prosperous in the first place? They may be secular now, but they're rooted in generations and generations of Protestant Christianity. If you want an example of a country that's atheist and not rooted in Christianity, look at communist China.
In the past, many Western countries, especially in Northern Europe, were Protestant, but their wealth didn't come from Bible study. It came from colonization, trade, and exploitation. The Dutch, they ran the world's first mega corporation, the Dutch East India Company, which was basically a pirate gang with a fancy name. They invaded Indonesia for spices, enslaved people, and hoarded cash. Denmark, same vibe, shipped sugar from Caribbean plantations worked by enslaved Africans. As for Spain and Portugal, they were Catholic countries that began colonizing the Americas long before Protestant nations joined the imperial race. Their early dominance in the New World was marked by the extraction of precious metals and the exploitation of indigenous people and enslaved Africans. So the idea that prosperity comes from Christian roots, it's more accurate to say that prosperity came from empire, exploitation, and extraction, regardless of denomination. Now, let's set those factors aside and entertain the argument that prosperity comes from Christian roots. Even then, we still have to reckon with the fact that Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore achieved remarkable prosperity without Christian foundations. South Korea's rapid development, for example, coincided with a decline in religious influence, not its increase. Northern Europe's success isn't despite secularism, but because of it. Universal healthcare, gender rights, individual rights, and merit-based systems thrive when religion isn't dictating policy. The claim that prosperity causes atheism because people feel less need for God when their material needs are met is one interpretation, but it overlooks the fact that these nations also have robust social safety nets, strong educational systems, and progressive policies that emphasize human rights, equality, and secular governance. These factors create an environment where people feel more freedom to question traditional beliefs. Not to mention, when you've got schools teaching kids to think critically and safety nets catching people before they fall, you don't need to pray for solutions, you've already got them. It's not God who, because they're cozy. It's God who, because they've figured out how to solve problems without a Bible. And China, it's a distraction. Atheism's not their problem and Christianity wouldn't be their fix.
This is just the first half of the reaction to the Redeemed Zoomer video. If you're interested in the final part, let me know in the comments. This video is about encouraging critical thinking. My only problem with beliefs is if someone believes in one thing without evidence. God knows what else they might accept without questioning. Ultimately, what you believe is up to you. Since Redeemed Zoomer's video is public opinions, including mine, should be questioned because they shape how people think. This is why the comments are open. You can share your thoughts and opinions below.